All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending what part of the world you're joining us from. I am Alex Faust, your host of Conversations at the Edge. I'm very excited to be joined by our guest today, David Emerald Womeldorff. And if you're not familiar with David, he is the author of the best-selling The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic, and Three Vital Questions Transforming Workplace Drama. He is also the creator-in-chief of the Center for Empowerment Dynamic and works in close collaboration with his partner, Donna Zajan. The Empowerment Dynamic and Three Vital Question frameworks are widely used around the world by individuals, teams, and organizations to transform everyday drama and to facilitate teamwork, change, and productivity. And today we're going to focus on how his frameworks impact our mindset as leaders and our ability to operate as excellent leaders for ourselves and for our communities, for our teams, et cetera. So David, welcome back to Conversations at the Edge. It's been almost 2 years since you've been with us. So,
amazing.
Where are you calling in from today?
Bainbridge Island, Washington, near Seattle.
Fantastic. Yep. Well, it's great to have you here. And I want
to
jump right in. Yeah, thank you. I want to jump right in and talk about this idea of mindset. And I've been writing a lot about mindset in terms of dealing with problems or issues and trying to see them as opportunities. I've been kind of relating it to the externalities that we're facing as a species today. And it's a goal for me personally to improve myself as a husband, a friend, a leader. So when it comes to mindset, I'm curious, what role do you see it playing for people in business and kind of what are your thoughts around that?
Well, first of all, Alex, I just want to say that your notion of where we are as a species, I think is spot on. I think where we are frankly, as a planet has everything to do with mindset. And you mentioned the three vital questions. We're going to just focus on what really is in the first vital question, which is where are you putting your focus, which has everything to do with mindset. And as leaders in organizations, as leaders in our families, as leaders of work teams, what we focus on has a great deal to do with what shows up in our experience. So frankly, it all begins with mindset. And there's a particular way that I frame mindset that I call FISB. And maybe if I kind of tee that up, we can kind of play with that as a way of looking at mindsets. And so the idea of FISB, it's not Frisbee, but FISB is, it's FISBE. And there are three components to what I see as what I'll refer to as the human operating system. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So FISB stands for focus. And what we focus on engages an inner state or an emotional response. So that's the IS of FISB. And that emotional response then drives our behavior, which is the BE. So you've got focus, inner state, behavior. And if you think about us as human beings, we're cognitive beings. We think about things, we focus and make interpretations of things. We are emotional beings. We have emotional responses. And obviously we're behavioral beings that take action. And so to connect it to the idea of the species is I firmly believe in business, in society, and frankly in the world, that we are in dire need of upgrading our human operating system.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just a reminder for the folks who are here live, if you do have questions for David, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll certainly be getting to those towards the end of our conversation today. So talk about, a little bit more about this human operating system. How do we kind of think about FISB and using it in our daily lives to make decisions and ultimately interact and engage with people?
You bet. Well, I'm going to bridge off of a great article that you sent out to membership last week from Harvard Business Review about the title, "To Be a Great Leader, You Need the Right Mindset." And as they did in that article, they contrasted a number of different sets of mindsets, kind of one being like the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Well, in our work, we also do kind of a comparison between two primary mindsets, or what I call two primary orientations, because the idea of what we focus on defines our orientation. And so the two primary orientations are a problem orientation and an outcome orientation. So let me take a minute and I'll describe the FISB for each of them. So in the problem orientation, obviously what we do is we focus on problems. And when a problem comes into our awareness, what it engages as an inner state is some form of anxiety. Now, there can be a range of anxiety responses. It could be as mild as this is a hassle and I wish it would go away to frankly out and out fear and terror. And it's fear-based anxiety. So the inner state is some form of anxiety, which then drives reactive behavior. And the four forms of reactive behavior that we speak to is traditionally in psychology, fight, flight, or freeze. We either aggress against the situation, we try to get away from it, flee, or we may do nothing and hope it goes away. And then the fourth that I've added is to appease, to go along, to get along. Here's the shadow side of that FISB, is that there is embedded in that FISB, which, by the way, I believe is our default orientation as human beings, and therefore human systems like organizations, is that the false assumption is we tell ourselves we're reacting to the problem, when in reality, we're reacting to the anxiety that we feel. And let me, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What I want to do is to verbally set up the FISB for the outcome orientation, so I can do a little bit of compare and contrast. And by the way, everybody has experience with the outcome orientation in their lives, at least at some point, but it's just not our default as human beings. So in the outcome orientation, we're focused obviously on outcomes, what it is that we want to create, what it is that we want to accomplish. And if we care about that outcome, it's going to tap into an inner state that's passion-based because we care about it. And that passion-based inner state is then going to drive behavior, which is creative in nature. I refer to it as baby steps. What's the next baby step that's going to help us get closer to or clearer about that outcome? So let me take a moment to compare and contrast those two mindsets, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. This one kind of the latest stage here. So back to the problem orientation. So what I want to do is I want to walk through a thought process so that I can validate for you and for those who are here or listening why this false assumption is so important to be aware of. And here's the thought process. So a problem occurs, and typically if I'm in a group or a classroom, I'd be asking leading questions, but I'm just going to give everybody the answer. So problem occurs. When the problem comes into our experience, it tends to increase our anxiety. And as our anxiety goes up, we then react, either fight, flight, freeze, or appease. Here's where the false assumption comes in. If our reaction has a positive impact on the situation at hand, what then happens is, because the situation seemingly, and I'm going to come back to seemingly, gets better, the intensity of the problem diminishes. Well, if the perceived intensity of the problem diminishes, my anxiety is going to diminish. If my anxiety diminishes, I'm just going to go on to the next thing that has my attention, and I'm going to stop reacting, only to have that problem reemerge. So one of the things I want to stress is the problem orientation is not a problem solving orientation. It's merely a problem reacting orientation, because what's driving our behavior is the anxiety we feel. And when the anxiety diminishes, we lose energy for action. And to me, leadership is about adopting this outcome orientation. And as we focus on the outcome, and sometimes our outcomes are clear and concrete, other times they may be more vague and directional. But as we focus on that and it taps into our passion, we take whatever the next baby step is, and that baby step either gets us closer to or helps us get clearer about the outcome. So it becomes kind of a virtuous cycle between the focus on the outcome we care about, our passion-based inner state, and taking generative creative action via baby steps. So that's kind of the distinction between the two FISBs and mindsets.
So I have a question about that. I mean, would you go as far to say that like one is good and one is bad, or is there opportunity or a place in, the human experience for problem orientation
Absolutely.
situation?
That's a great. It's a great question, Alex. And the question is, what's the result that you want to create? That's really the ultimate question behind both the orientations. And if I were to illustrate, so in the problem orientation, because of the the problem, anxiety, reaction, diminishment of problem, diminishment of anxiety, diminishment of action, what that results in is kind of what I call a roller coaster. And just a simple example that a lot of us can relate to is weight gain and weight loss. The step on the scale, don't like what I see, feel a bit of anxiety about it, watch what I eat, exercise, things get better, go on vacation, decide to fall off the wagon. And so now, to answer your question, if what you want, the result you want is to keep things within an upper and lower limit of things, like statistical process control is based on this, then you only want to be in action when things are out of kilter. So I'll use a mundane example. Even though I haven't been on an airplane for quite a while because of COVID, the example I used to use, if I'm flying home and an engine flares out, I don't want the pilot and the captain to be in that moment saying, "Hey, let's get together and what's the outcome that we want?" No, I want them to feel a appropriate level of anxiety, take reactive action that gets that plane or that engine back up and running and gets us safely home. So there are times where if things are cycling out of control, you want to do that get things back into an equilibrium. That said, if what you want is something new, different, better, if what you want is sustainable change, because you don't get sustainable change out of the problem orientation. You can get episodic short term, but you're not going to get sustainable change out of the problem orientation. It really has to be rooted in that outcome orientation. And by the way, I also want to add that in the outcome orientation, it's important to know that we solve problems in service to the outcomes. So sometimes the baby steps are good problem solving approaches and tools and techniques, but we're focusing on the problems that we need to resolve in service to the outcome that we want to create.
That's interesting, and I think a really good distinction. So, I think as a collective, probably most leaders in our community want to be operating in that outcome orientation most of the
Right.
time. When we think about building our business and building our teams, hopefully we're not reactive all the time. But I got to imagine it's easier said than done. I mean, speaking of from experience, it's definitely easier said than done. So, do you have any recommendations of like how to turn this into a habit, and how do you pause and make sure that you're not reacting to the anxieties but really reacting to the outcomes, or creating solutions to the outcomes that you
Yeah.
desire?
Yeah. In your question, Alex, is one of the keys because you use the word pause. I mean, the most crucial thing is to be able to develop a habit of pausing and, in a sense, calling a timeout. So when a problem occurs, and I just want to take a half step back. One of the things that I'd also say is rather than seeing the two mindsets or orientations as being kind of firmly either or, think about them as being on a continuum. And it's like, where is the center of gravity for you? So the habit to develop is that when a problem occurs, being able to pause and ask the question of what does this problem, what is this problem in relation to that I care about? Or why? So another way of framing it that's going to sound real crass is, why do I care about this problem? And is it a problem that somebody else has anxiety around? Or is it a problem that really is strategically important for the outcomes that we want to create? And that to me is the habit, is being able to call that momentary timeout and to ask the question, what is it we really want? And sometimes it takes reframing, in a sense, reframing the problem and being able to say, if I solve this problem, what would it allow me to have? Or what would it allow us to do that problem is standing as an inhibitor to? If you can answer that question, you're inherently shifting your focus to the outcome that you want, and then saying, let's tackle this problem because it's strategically important.
Right. And so is this something that, you do for yourself, or is it something that you can practice with a team and kind of create outcome orientation organizations versus
Yeah.
individuals?
Well, the answer is yes, all the above. Yeah, and actually, as you asked that question, I'm reminded of the CEO of a small services company, computer services company, who was an early adopter of some of the TED frameworks. And one of the things that he did, and again, it was not a large organization. I think he had at the time 25, 30 employees. And what he did was he took the FISBs and then some of the other models that we have, but I want to stay with the FISBs. He put the FISBs on the wall of his office and on the wall of his conference room. And then what he did was he gave everybody in the organization permission to, at any point in time, to be able to say time out and ask the question, where are we? And he said that it fundamentally changed the way people were interacting, and it fundamentally changed their way of thinking, because everybody had permission to be in what in the TED language I call a challenger, just by calling a timeout and saying, where are we? And it would allow that shift that I talked about a few minutes ago to there be space for that shift. It's like, oh, we're really focused on this problem. What's that problem in relation to that we really care about? What is it that what's the outcome that we really want, that if we solve that problem, it would allow us to have? And I would say that a lot of this work, Alex, really frankly starts individually, because as leaders, kind of a fundamental assumption that Donna, my partner, and I have is that all leadership starts with self-leadership, and because how we lead our own lives has everything to do with the quality of leadership that we bring to our organizations, our teams, et cetera.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And one of the reasons why this idea of mindset and this outcome orientation stuff is so important to me is because I want to be able to convey that to those around me as well. So I appreciate that idea. And just a reminder, if you're here live and you do want to ask questions, please type them in. We've got about 12 minutes left, so
Great.
definitely want to make sure that we get to your questions as well. So I'm curious, like you mentioned this a second ago, but like how much of a spillover effect does this mindset like have in a company? So if you're the leader, how much impact is your mindset having on the teams around you? Does it need to start at the CEO level? Can it be a middle manager who's kind of like creating a shift? What do you see in terms of the spillover and impact from other individuals?
Well, the short answer to me is it can begin anywhere. And just the way you frame the question, I'm not doing this to do a shameless plug, but the Three Vital Questions book, actually the story, it's a fable, and the main character is a team lead. He's not even in a formal supervisory role. And in that, he gets exposed to this way of thinking and some of the other frameworks, and he starts to change his behavior, and the ripple effect that it impacts his boss, who is very problem oriented, and it's subtle and it's a baby step at a time. But the reality is, I mean, would it be great if it starts from the top and filters down? And we have plenty of experience working with CEOs and doing that, but it really can begin wherever the individual is, and working with their own mindset.
That's great. Thank you. And what do you see as like the thing people most often get wrong when trying to make that shift? Like where do people
Yeah.
kind of go off the deep end and maybe have an adverse effect?
Well, I'm going to answer a little bit different question if I can.
Sure.
That rather than deep end or wrong, I can tell you that one of the challenges we have in teaching this, and where people can misinterpret the idea of outcomes, is that, and that's the confusion between outcomes and goals, which may be a surprising answer to you because they are related, but they can be very different. And sometimes we think outcomes are only goals, that we need to accomplish X, Y, Z by such and such a time, or get this measurable result. And again, that can be really important, but outcomes are longer term, tend to be more global. I'll give you an example. Coca-Cola, actually way back in 1923, the guy who was the CEO back then, their marketing, they came up with a strategic vision, which to me is an outcome goal of that Coca-Cola is within arm's reach of everybody on the planet. Think about that as an outcome. And so every time they set a goal, every time they do strategic planning, every time it's like, is what we are planning, is what we are talking about going to move us in the direction of that ultimately unattainable, but that ultimate outcome. And then setting goals and setting those baby step goals in service to that. And so what can happen is that the interpretation of goals as being outcomes, when in fact goals are in service to some larger, more impassioned outcome.
So let's maybe dig into that a little bit more to understand
Sure.
the distinction. So you're having a problem, let's say, with sales,
Okay.
and the outcome that you're wanting is an improved sales process. Is that the goal? Is that the outcome? Is the goal the number of the revenue? Or like, how are you seeing the relationship between goals and outcomes when sales is the problem?
Yeah. Well, actually, again, I love the way you ask questions because there's a kernel in your question that to me is the unlocking key, which is what's going on with the sales process. And let's look at the process. And kind of the organizing question that gets us to outcomes is, if we had the ideal sales process, how would we know it? And the answer to how we would know it would not be initially we would meet these targets. It would be, what would our clients be saying? How would we be spending our time? What would be the criteria by which, if we had the ideal sales process, we would know it? Design that, and then look at what's going on in our current reality that supports that process, and what's going on in our current reality, our current process that's inhibiting or derailing that process. So I hope that helps in terms of the distinction. The goal, the sales will be a measurable, but it's not the measurable to the outcome.
Yeah, makes sense. So, we just talked about outcomes and goals. How about like a distinction between what I assume happens a lot is like optimism and outcome orientation? Can there be, one without the other? How do you see those two ideas interacting?
Yeah, actually, again, great question. So I do think the outcome orientation tends to be more, I don't want to do air quotes, but more optimistic in nature, certainly more possibility oriented and a longer term. But I also want to stress, Alex, that the outcome orientation is not all goodness and light. And in fact, sometimes the outcome orientation, many times, I would say the outcome orientation in the long run can be harder work than the problem orientation. Because in the problem orientation, I'm just reacting to the next incoming, right? And the problem is determining my focus. Whereas it takes some work to stay focused on the outcome in the face of realities that we're facing as an organization or as a team. And so I think there's optimism in the long game here, knowing that. So a distinction that I sometimes make is, I think that in the problem orientation, a phenomenon can absolutely be burnout. And burnout is what happens when I spend all my time and energy doing things and reacting in a way that in the long run doesn't make a difference. I just did air quotes. Doesn't make a difference. Whereas the emotional quality in the outcome orientation can be what I call creative exhaustion. It's like, man, We accomplished it. Boy, did it take a lot of energy, and man, am I wiped out. But underneath that is a sense of satisfaction, and that sense optimism. But it's not all goodness in life, and it can be really hard work.
And so can you talk a little bit about like the mindset of positivity and like the role that that also plays in, the leader's role, and when does it go too far? Like, is there, such thing as like toxic positivity, and like, do you really need to like be feeling negative feelings with your team in order to be sincere? I'm just
Yeah.
curious about your
No, actually,
insight.
again, is that as you were asked, framing up the question, I thought about toxic positivity. It's about being, it's about telling the truth. And what I mean by that, it's telling the truth about what we desire in terms of outcome, and it's telling the truth about current reality and allowing the mix of emotions and the mix that happens in realities to be spoken to and present. I'll give you hopefully a real quick story. I'm looking at time. I want to make sure that we've got time for questions if they're there. Is that so? At one point in my career, I was internal in a large financial institution, had gotten recruited to help build out executive education, and we did our first budget process. And so we submitted our budget request. And the meeting I'm about to describe is the meeting that we've all been in, where it's like, you asked for this, here's what you get, and how are you going to change your plans to work within that budget. And I was with my boss and my boss's boss and teammates, and both my boss and boss's boss were two of the best leaders I've ever worked for. So we get into the meeting. My boss's boss, the senior leader, says, "Okay, guys, here's the number we have to work with. How are we going to change our plans?" And I got to tell you, the energy in the room was like trying to start a car in Minneapolis in January. It's like, and finally, one of my teammates said, "Can I say something?" Jeff was the name of the leader. And Jeff said, "Sure." I hope it's okay to use this language. He said, I'm really pissed. Now, I just want to pause for a second, because what do you think Jeff's response to that would be? And I would say that most leaders, out of a problem orientation, would react in some way where it's like either get over it or, sorry. Jeff's response was, "Oh, you're angry. Got it. How's everybody else feeling?" And a lot of leaders wouldn't ask that second question because they're afraid of opening Pandora's box. But here's what he did, Alex, which is to me about telling the truth, is somebody else said, "Yeah, I'm really frustrated." "Ah, you're frustrated. Got it. What else?" And after literally 3 minutes of clock time, people expressed their feelings. And finally, the first person said, "Okay, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're disappointed, and this is what we've got. What are we going to do differently?" We got creative, had a great year. But I'm convinced if Jeff, as that leader, would have squelched the telling the truth about how we were feeling, we'd probably still be sitting there.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. We have a comment from one of our community members. "I developed a mindset of creative indifference as it allows me to prevent upsets with undesirable situations."
Hmm. Creative indifference, interesting notion. And actually, I'm going to, that could be interpreted as, well, let me pause. To me, there's a really important distinction that actually comes out of some Buddhist teachings, but distinction between attachment, detachment, and non-attachment. And we all know what attachment is, which is it's got to be my way, my way or the highway. Detachment, which could be creative indifference, but I don't think this is what the member's saying. Creative indifference could be detachment. Detachment is kind of the teenage voice that says, "Yeah, whatever." It's a not caring. Whereas non-attachments can be a form of creative indifference where I'm not attached that it's got to be my way. I have some, I have a form of attachment, but not attachment in the sense I just said, and that I really care about the outcome. That's what I want to say. I really care about the outcome, and I'm not attached that it's got to look a particular way, or that we've got to accomplish that my way. So I can be creatively indifferent while still really holding to and desiring that outcome.
That's great.
And yeah,
Thank you for that. So, we're at time, but David, I want to give you, one last opportunity. Anything else you want the community to know before we head out today?
well, I would just say that kind of circling back to your opening comment and opening question is the work of mindsets again begins individually, and the mindset that we adopt then ripples out to our teams, to our organizations, to our families, to our communities, our neighborhoods, etc. So again, this notion that all leadership begins with self-leadership, and to just kind of remember that mantra.
Well, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure having you join us today. It's always great to learn from you, and thank you to the community for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Great being with you, Alex.
Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
To the greater in you. Bye-bye.